My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm 28 years old. For the last 10 years, my parents have told anyone who would listen that I was their brilliant but troubled daughter. The jobless one who lived in their basement, tinkering with computers, too socially awkward to make it in the real world. They painted a picture of themselves as long-suffering saints, patiently supporting a child who refused to grow up. They were so convincing that even I started to believe it. That was their greatest trick. Last Tuesday, in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom, they stood before a judge and demanded legal control over my inheritance, claiming I was mentally incompetent and financially irresponsible. They described me as a hopeless case, a drain on their resources. But they didn't know my secret. They didn't know the name of the company I had built in that very basement. And when my lawyer finally said its name aloud, the silence in that courtroom was more powerful than any shout I had ever heard. If you've ever felt underestimated by the very people who should have been your biggest supporters, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how we got to that life-altering moment in court, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because this is a story about how the quietest person in the room can have the loudest victory. To understand the courtroom, you have to understand the basement. My parents, Richard and Margaret Vance, lived in a sprawling colonial house in a wealthy Connecticut suburb. It was a house built for appearances, with a manicured lawn and a formal dining room that was used exactly once a year. My older brother, Daniel, was the centerpiece of their carefully constructed world. He was the captain of the football team, the business major who graduated with a C, average but a mountain of charisma, the son who was destined to take over the world. I was the afterthought, the quiet, nerdy girl who preferred books to parties and coding to conversations. From a young age, the roles were set. Daniel was the son. I was a distant, flickering star they occasionally remembered existed. I remember my 8th grade science fair. I had spent months building a rudimentary robot that could solve a Rubik's Cube. It was clunky and made of spare parts, but it worked. I won first place for the entire district. When I brought the blue ribbon home, my father glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Ellie. Did you hear Daniel scored the winning touchdown today?" Later that evening, they took Daniel out for a steak dinner to celebrate his game. I ate leftover casserole alone. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. It was worse. It was a casual, ingrained dismissal of my entire existence. My passions, my achievements, they were hobbies, trivialities. Daniel's every minor success was a milestone for the Vance family legacy. This pattern became the wallpaper of my life. When I graduated from MIT, summa cum laude in computer science, my parents attended the ceremony. But the dinner afterward was all about Daniel's new startup, a vaguely defined consulting firm that they had funded with $50,000. He spent the entire meal talking about networking and synergy, while my degree, earned through scholarships and sleepless nights, was treated like a footnote. After college, the pressure to conform began. My father wanted me to get a real job, something respectable like a project manager at IBM, where he could boast about my title at the country club. My mother wanted me to get married, to find a nice young man like Daniel's friends. But I had my own dream. I saw a future in decentralized data security, a niche that was just beginning to emerge. I tried to explain it to my father once. His eyes glazed over within 30 seconds. "Just send out your resume, Eleanor. This computer nonsense is a phase." So, I made a compromise. I moved into their finished basement. It was a large space, and it had a separate entrance. I told them I was freelancing to build my portfolio. This was a narrative they could accept. It framed me as a struggling artist, which, while not ideal, was better than being a complete failure. They agreed, on the condition that I contribute by being the family's on-call IT support and general problem solver. My rent was paid in untangling their Wi-Fi, setting up their new iPhones, fixing Daniel's laptop every time he downloaded a virus, and even doing their taxes because I was good with numbers. For years, I lived a double life. To my family, I was Jobless Ellie, the girl in the basement. I wore old hoodies and jeans, my hair perpetually in a messy bun. I was quiet at family dinners, letting the conversation about Daniel's latest big deal wash over me. But when I went downstairs and closed the door, I became EV. I was building a company from scratch. I spent 18 hours a day writing code, negotiating with clients over encrypted channels, and building a team of remote developers who only knew me by my online handle. The company was called Ethelgard Technologies. It was my secret, my passion, my entire world. The only person who knew the truth was my Aunt Clara, my mother's younger sister. Clara was a rebel, a brilliant software engineer who had been a pioneer in Silicon Valley in the 80 seconds before cashing out and moving back east to live a quiet life. She was the one who gave me my first computer, who taught me my first line of code. She saw the fire in me that my parents actively ignored. She was my mentor, my confidant, my biggest cheerleader. We spoke every week, her voice a lifeline of sanity. "Let them underestimate you, Ellie," she'd say, her voice crackling over the phone. "It's the most powerful weapon you'll ever have. Build your empire in silence. One day, the noise it makes will be deafening." My parents and Daniel, meanwhile, grew more condescending over time. They saw my Spartan lifestyle as proof of my failure. I didn't buy new clothes. I drove a 10-year-old car. I rarely went out. They didn't know that every dollar I saved was being reinvested into Ethelgard, into server costs, and salaries for my growing team. Daniel was the worst. He'd saunter downstairs with his laundry, toss it in the machine next to my desk, and say things like, "Still playing with your little website, sis? You know, my friend is hiring interns. Maybe I could get you an interview. It doesn't pay much, but at least it's a real job." He had no idea that the little website I was working on was a platform that had just secured a 7-figure contract with a Fortune 500 company. I would just smile and nod, a habit I'd perfected over a lifetime. "Thanks, Daniel. I'll think about it." My silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It was patience. I was playing the long game, but I had no idea how soon and how brutally that game was about to be called. I believed I could maintain this balance forever, building my world in the shadows while they lived their lives in blissful ignorance. I thought my secret was safe. But a single phone call was about to change everything and drag my silent world into a war I never saw coming. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in April. I was in the middle of a complex code review, my screen a cascade of green and black text, when my mother's number flashed on my phone. I almost ignored it. Her calls during the day were usually requests to fix her printer or complaints about the slow internet. But something made me answer. Her voice was strained, thin. "Eleanor, it's your Aunt Clara. There's been an accident." The world tilted on its axis. Clara, my vibrant, fiercely independent aunt, had suffered a massive heart attack while hiking. She was gone before the paramedics even arrived. The news was a physical blow. I remember dropping the phone, a hollow roar filling my ears. The one person in the world who saw me, who truly knew me, was gone. The funeral was a blur of black suits, hushed condolences, and the cloying scent of lilies. My parents and Daniel performed their grief flawlessly. My father gave a stoic, moving eulogy about his beloved sister-in-law, conveniently forgetting the years he'd dismissed her as an eccentric spinster. My mother wept into a silk handkerchief. Daniel stood with a solemn expression, looking every bit the dutiful nephew. I, on the other hand, was a mess. I couldn't perform. My grief was raw, silent, and deep. I stood by the graveside and felt a loneliness so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. My family interpreted my quiet devastation as further proof of my strangeness. "She's always been so emotional," I heard my mother whisper to a cousin. "It's not healthy." A week after the funeral, we were summoned to the office of Clara's estate lawyer, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Abernathy. I drove with my parents and Daniel, the silence in the car thick with unspoken expectations. My parents had always viewed Clara's wealth with a mixture of envy and disdain. She had made millions in tech, but she lived simply. They were convinced she had a fortune squirreled away, and it was clear they expected a significant portion of it to go to my mother, her only sister. Daniel was practically vibrating with anticipation, no doubt already planning how to spend his share on a new sports car or another one of his failing ventures. Mr. Abernathy's office was filled with old books and the smell of lemon polish. He greeted us with a somber expression and gestured for us to sit. "Thank you for coming," he began, opening a leather-bound folder. Clara was very specific in her final wishes. My father leaned forward slightly, his mask of grief replaced by one of keen interest. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat and began to read. Clara had left a few sentimental items to my mother, a collection of first-edition novels. She left a small, fixed sum of $25,000 to Daniel. I saw a flicker of disappointment cross my brother's face. Then, Mr. Abernathy took a deep breath. "And to her beloved niece, Eleanor Vance," he read, his voice clear and firm. "In recognition of her spirit, her brilliance, and her unwavering vision, Clara leaves the remainder of her estate." The room went completely still. "The remainder?" my father asked, his voice sharp. "Yes," Mr. Abernathy confirmed, looking over his spectacles. "This includes her portfolio of stocks and bonds, her real estate holdings, and her primary residence. The total value of the estate bequeathed to Eleanor is approximately $5 million. $5 million. The words hung in the air, electric and unreal. I couldn't breathe. It was a sum so vast, so beyond my comprehension, that it felt like a number from a different universe. But I barely had a moment to process the shock before I saw the looks on my family's faces. My mother's jaw was slack, her eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. And my father was looking at me. But it wasn't a look of happiness or pride. It was a look I had never seen before. Cold, calculating, and utterly terrifying. It was the look of a man who saw not a daughter, but an obstacle. "There must be a mistake," my father said, his voice dangerously calm. She's not equipped to handle that kind of money. She doesn't even have a job." Mr. Abernathy didn't flinch. "Clara was of perfectly sound mind when she drafted this will last year. She was very clear about her intentions. She also left a personal letter for you, Eleanor." He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished table towards me. My hands shook as I took it. The ride home was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The faux sympathy was gone, replaced by a chilling new narrative. "We're worried about you, sweetheart," my mother began, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "That's a lot of responsibility. People will try to take advantage of you." "Your mother is right," my father added, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "You've never had to manage anything more than your hobbies. This money needs to be protected. It needs to be managed properly, by someone with experience." The implication was crystal clear. By someone with experience, he meant himself. The $5 million was no longer my inheritance. In their minds, it had already become the Vance family fund, a resource to be controlled and allocated by its patriarch. They saw Clara's final, beautiful gift to me not as an act of love and belief, but as a problem to be solved, a wild asset to be tamed. That night, I sat in my basement, Clara's letter unopened in my lap. the weight of those millions pressing down on me. I thought this was the worst it could get. I thought their greed had reached its peak, but I was wrong. This was only the beginning, and their campaign to seize control of my future was about to become far more aggressive and far more cruel than I could ever have imagined. The week following the will reading was like living in a slow-motion siege. My family's strategy shifted from feigned concern to relentless pressure. The first move came 2 days later. In the form of a family meeting, my father called in his study. He sat behind his large mahogany desk, a prop he used when he wanted to project authority. My mother sat in a wing-back chair, twisting a handkerchief. Daniel lounged against the bookshelf, an arrogant smirk on his face. "Eleanor," my father began, steepling his fingers, "we've had some time to think, and we've come up with a solution that will protect you and this unexpected windfall." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a crudely drafted document that proposed creating a family trust. He would be the trustee, with full control over all investment decisions. I would be given a modest monthly allowance to cover my living expenses. "This way you won't have to worry your pretty little head about the stock market or capital gains," he said, his tone deeply patronizing. "We'll handle the heavy lifting. You can just continue with your projects." I looked at the paper, then back at him. My voice, when I found it, was quiet but firm. "No." My father's face tightened. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no thank you," I clarified. "Aunt Clara entrusted this to me. I intend to honor that trust and manage it myself." "Manage it yourself?" Daniel scoffed from the corner. "You can barely manage to buy your own groceries, Ellie. Dad pays for your car insurance. Mom buys your toilet paper. You live here for free. What makes you think you can manage $5 million? Every word was a calculated jab, designed to remind me of my perceived dependence, to reinforce the narrative of my incompetence. I refused to take the bait. "I appreciate everything you've done for me," I said calmly. "But this is my responsibility now." The meeting ended in a stalemate, but it was clear they were just getting started. The second incident was more insidious. A few days later, my mother approached me, her face a mask of concern. "Sweetheart, your father and I were talking, and we think you might be feeling overwhelmed, depressed even. After Clara's death, it's understandable. We've made an appointment for you with a wonderful therapist, Dr. Albright. He's a dear friend of your father's." I knew Dr. Albright. He was a psychiatrist known for catering to the wealthy elite of our town, a man who played golf with my father. An independent evaluation from him would be anything but. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to build a case. A case that I was mentally fragile, unstable, and incapable of making my own decisions. "Thank you for the thought, Mom," I said, my voice sweet as poison. "But I'm handling my grief in my own way. I don't think that will be necessary." Her smile faltered. My polite refusal was not part of their plan. The third escalation came via a phone call from my uncle, my father's brother. His tone was conspiratorial. "Ellie, your father called me. Well, he's worried sick. He said you're not acting like yourself, that you're being secretive and paranoid. He thinks this money might be too much for you to handle. We're all just concerned for your well-being. They were poisoning the well, turning my extended family against me, painting me as an ungrateful, unstable heiress who was being manipulated by unseen forces. But the fourth incident was the one that truly showed me the depths of their cruelty. I had a small savings account, about $3,000 I'd painstakingly saved from early freelance gigs before Ethelgard became profitable. I kept it for emergencies. I went to the ATM one afternoon to pull out some cash and my card was declined. Confused, I checked the balance. It was zero. I went inside the bank, my heart pounding. The teller looked at me with pity. "Ma'am, The account was closed this morning, she explained. Your father, Richard Vance, was a joint signatory on the account. He had the authority to close it and withdraw the funds. He had taken my emergency fund, the only money I had that was truly mine, separate from the inheritance and my company. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the violation. It was a power play, a clear message. We control you. You have nothing without us. I walked out of the bank feeling dizzy, the betrayal a cold knot in my stomach. That night, I finally opened Clara's letter. I needed her voice, her strength. Her familiar, elegant handwriting filled the page. My dearest Ellie, if you are reading this, I am gone. Do not mourn me for too long. I have lived a full life, and my greatest joy was watching you grow into the brilliant woman you are. I am leaving you everything, not as a burden, but as a key. The key to the life you were meant to live, free from the small-minded expectations of others. They will not understand. Your parents, your brother, they have never understood your value because they measure worth in country club memberships and job titles. They will see this money as something to be controlled, something that belongs to them by proxy. They will try to make you feel small, weak, and incapable. Do not let them. You are a builder, Eleanor. You build worlds with lines of code. Now, build your own world in real life. Use this money to give Ethelgard the launch it deserves. Use it to buy your freedom. You have an empire at your fingertips, one you built with your own mind and your own hands. Never, ever let anyone make you feel that you are not enough. You are more than enough. You are everything. All my love. Forever, Gleda. Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of gratitude and resolve. She had known. She had seen it all coming. Her letter wasn't just a goodbye. It was a battle plan. It was the permission I needed to stop being the quiet girl in the basement and start being the woman Clara always knew I was. The next day, I started making calls. I transferred the entire inheritance into a new set of accounts at a different bank, under my name only. Then, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the top estate litigation firm in the state. I needed the best. This brings me to the warning from the outside. It wasn't a friend or a co-worker. It was my first meeting with my new lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Jessica Morales. I laid out the whole situation. The family trust document, the attempt to force me into therapy, the stolen savings account. She listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me directly. Miss Vance, she said, her voice devoid of pity, filled instead with professional gravity. What you're describing is not a concerned family. This is a coordinated campaign of coercion and financial abuse. The fact that they are trying to lay the groundwork for a psychiatric evaluation is particularly alarming. They are not going to stop. Their next step, I would wager, will be to try and have you declared legally incompetent. They will file for a conservatorship. The word hung in the air between us. Conservatorship. A legal cage. It was a terrifying thought, but hearing it from her, stated so plainly, was also a strange kind of validation. I wasn't being paranoid. I wasn't overreacting. This was real. This was a fight. They think I'm a jobless, naive girl who plays on the computer? I told her, a new hardness in my voice. They have no idea who they're dealing with. Jessica Morales smiled for the first time. It was a sharp, predatory smile. Good, she said. Then let's make sure that when they find out it's in a room where a judge is listening. I left her office with a clear plan and a sense of cold, terrifying purpose. I knew the final confrontation was coming, but I had underestimated their speed and their utter lack of shame. I was about to find out just how low they would go to get what they wanted, and their next move would be the one that finally broke everything. The final, unforgivable act came a week later. It arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, official rustle of paper. I was down in my office, deep in a meeting with my development team about an upcoming security patch, when the doorbell rang. I ignored it, assuming my mother would get it. A few minutes later, she came down the basement stairs, a strange, triumphant glint in her eyes. It was the same look she got when she found a designer handbag on sale. "Eleanor, this is for you," she said, holding out a large manila envelope. Her voice was too casual, too light. I took it from her, a sense of dread washing over me. The envelope was from the state of Connecticut probate court. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside, nestled amongst pages of dense legalese, were the words Jessica Morales had predicted: "Petition for conservatorship of the person and estate of Eleanor Vance." I scanned the document, my blood turning to ice. The petitioners were my parents, Richard and Margaret Vance. The document claimed that I, Eleanor Vance, was unable to manage my own financial affairs or provide for my own personal needs due to a persistent psychological disability and a disconnect from reality. It was all there, laid out in black and white. They had twisted every aspect of my life into a weapon against me. My joblessness was cited as proof of my inability to function in society. My quiet, focused nature was described as social withdrawal and paranoia. My passion for coding, my life's work, was dismissed as an obsessive and unhealthy fixation on computers, indicative of a failure to engage with the real world. They even included a signed affidavit from their friend, Dr. Albright, the psychiatrist they'd tried to send me to, stating that based on his long-standing observation of the family, he believed a professional evaluation of my mental state was urgently required. He had never once treated me or even spoken to me about my mental health. But the most brutal part, the part that felt like a physical blow, was the section about Aunt Clara. They claimed her death had been a destabilizing event that had pushed me over the edge. They suggested that Clara, in her later years, had also exhibited eccentric behaviors, and that my inheritance was not a gift of love, but the result of my having exerted undue influence over a vulnerable, elderly woman. They were desecrating her memory, twisting her love for me into something sick and manipulative, all to get their hands on her money. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't just about greed anymore. This was about annihilation. They didn't just want to control my money. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to legally strip me of my identity, my autonomy, my sanity, and even my relationship with the one person who had ever truly believed in me. I looked up from the papers at my mother, who was still standing there, watching my reaction with a look of feigned sympathy. "The court date is in 3 weeks," she said softly, as if she were telling me the time. "Don't worry, dear. It's for the best. We'll take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a thing ever again." And in that moment, something inside me snapped. The years of quiet endurance, of patient tolerance, of biting my tongue and swallowing my pride, it all evaporated. The hurt and the betrayal didn't curdle into sadness. It crystallized into something hard, cold, and diamond-sharp. It was rage, a calm, quiet, all-consuming rage. I folded the court documents neatly and placed them on my desk. I looked at my mother, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see a parent. I saw an adversary. The mask was off. The battle lines were drawn. "You're right," I said, my voice so calm it was chilling. "I won't have to worry, because you have just made the biggest mistake of your lives." Her smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had expected tears, hysterics, a collapse. She had not expected this cold, steely resolve. "Now, Eleanor, don't be dramatic. Get out of my office." I said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. She was so taken aback that she actually took a step backward. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it, turned, and scurried up the stairs. The moment she was gone, I pulled out my phone and dialed Jessica Morales. They did it, I said, my voice steady. They filed for conservatorship. There was a pause on the other end. Then I heard the rustle of papers. I see it, Jessica said. It just came across my desk. They are requesting an emergency hearing. They're not just trying to take the money, Jessica, I said, looking at the cruel words on the page. They're trying to destroy my aunt's memory. They're trying to have me declared insane. I know, she replied, her voice grim. And we are not going to let them. It's time to stop playing defense, Miss Vance. It's time to show them who you really are. I looked around the basement that had been my sanctuary and my prison. I looked at the glowing screens that connected me to an empire they couldn't even conceive of. They thought they had cornered a mouse. They were about to find out they had kicked a hornet's nest. They had declared war on the wrong jobless girl. The hearing was set. They had their story, their evidence, and their team of cronies. They thought they had me trapped, but they had no idea about the secret I had been keeping for a decade, and the weapon I was about to unleash in that courtroom. My plan was already in motion. The 3 weeks leading up to the court date were the most intensely focused of my life. My family treated me like a ghost. They would speak around me, their conversations filled with heavy sighs and worried glances, a theatrical performance for an audience of one. They clearly believed their victory was a foregone conclusion. They thought I was doing nothing, just sitting in my basement, waiting for the inevitable. They were wrong. My basement had transformed from a development hub into a war room. My first call after hanging up with Jessica was to my chief financial officer, a brilliant and fiercely loyal man named Ben Carter. Ben was one of the first people I'd hired. He was based in San Francisco, and we had only ever met in person twice, but we'd spent thousands of hours building Athelgard together over encrypted video calls. He knew me only as EV, the enigmatic founder. It was time for that to change. Ben, I said, my voice clear and steady, I need you to do something for me. I need you to compile a complete, certified financial portfolio for Athelgard Technologies. I need our incorporation documents, our current valuation, our major client contracts heavily redacted, of course our payroll records, and my personal tax returns for the past 5 years. And I need them overnighted to my attorney's office in Connecticut. There was a stunned silence on the other end. E.V., he finally said, his voice cautious. That's our entire financial lifeblood. Is everything okay? Are we being audited? No, I said. Everything is not okay. But it's personal, not corporate. I need you to trust me, Ben. Of course, he said without hesitation. You'll have it by morning. That was the power of the world I had built. A world based on mutual respect and trust. A stark contrast to the one upstairs. Next, I worked with Jessica to craft our strategy. It was a strategy of quiet preparation and overwhelming force. We wouldn't just defend against their claims. We would systematically dismantle them, then go on the offensive. Our secret weapon wasn't just the existence of Athelgard. It was the mountain of irrefutable proof that came with it. First, we addressed the claim of mental incompetence. Jessica hired our own independent psychiatrist, a highly respected expert from Yale, to conduct a thorough evaluation of me. I spent 2 days with Dr. Ramirez, undergoing tests and interviews. Her final report was unequivocal. I was not only psychologically sound, but possessed superior executive function and cognitive processing abilities. She found no evidence of paranoia, depression, or any other condition that would impair my judgment. Second, we tackled their star witness, Dr. Albright. Jessica's team did a deep dive into his professional history. They discovered he had been censured twice by the state medical board for ethical violations, both related to providing expert opinions in legal cases for personal friends without ever examining the subjects. He was a hired gun, and we now had the ammunition to prove it. Third, we prepared the grand reveal. This was the part that required the most precision. We couldn't just announce I was the CEO of a tech company. We had to prove it in a way that would be legally indisputable and maximally impactful in the courtroom. Ben's overnighted package was a treasure trove. It contained the original Articles of Incorporation for Ethelgard Technologies, LLC, listing Eleanor Vance as the sole founder and owner. Certified financial statements audited by a top-tier accounting firm showing consistent, explosive revenue growth over 5 years. The most recent independent valuation of the company, placing its worth at over $50 million. My personal tax returns, which showed an adjusted gross income of over $2 million in the previous year alone, with every cent meticulously reported to the IRS. Redacted copies of contracts with major corporations, including well-known names in the banking and defense sectors. Jessica looked over the documents, a slow smile spreading across her face. "This isn't just a defense, miss. Vance," she said, her voice filled with awe. "This is a tactical nuke." While Jessica prepared the legal assault, I handled a more personal matter. I went to the bank and accessed Aunt Clara's safe deposit box. Inside, alongside her will, was another letter addressed to me, marked, "To be opened only in case of emergency." My hands trembled as I read it. Clara, ever the strategist, had anticipated this. She detailed my parents' long history of financial irresponsibility, my father's failed business ventures in the 90 seconds that she had bailed him out of, my mother's gambling debts from a decade ago. She had kept records, canceled checks, and signed loan agreements. She had documented everything. She was giving me the power to not only defend myself, but to expose the hypocrisy at the heart of their entire argument. They weren't responsible financial stewards. They were failures who had been propped up by the very woman whose memory they were now trying to defame. The final piece of the plan was me. I had to look the part. The day before the hearing, I went shopping. I didn't buy a flashy designer suit. That wasn't me. I bought a simple, impeccably tailored navy blue dress, low heels, and a single strand of pearls that had belonged to Clara. I had my hair professionally styled, and for the first time in years, I wore makeup. It wasn't a costume. It was armor. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw jobless Ellie from the basement. I saw Eleanor Vance, founder and CEO of Ethelgard Technologies. I saw the woman my aunt always knew I could be. The night before the hearing, I moved out. I didn't say a word to my parents. I packed a single suitcase with my new clothes and my laptop, and checked into a hotel suite overlooking the harbor. I ordered room service and spent the evening on a video call with my team, finalizing the launch of our new software suite. It was business as usual. As I looked out at the city lights, I felt a profound sense of calm. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. All that remained was a cold, clear focus. They had started this war, but I was the one who was going to end it. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse alone. My family was already there, huddled with their lawyer, whispering and shooting me looks of pity and disdain. They saw the girl they thought they knew. They had no idea they were about to meet the woman she had become. The stage was set for the performance of a lifetime. The probate courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. All dark wood and faded flags, which only amplified the tension. My parents, Daniel, and their lawyer, Mr. Henderson, sat at one table, looking confident and somber. They were playing the part of the worried family perfectly. I sat with Jessica Morales at the opposing table. I kept my back straight, my hands folded calmly on the table, and my gaze fixed on the judge's bench. The hearing began. Judge Miller, A stern-looking woman in her 60s with sharp eyes reviewed the petition. Mr. Henderson stood up and began his opening statement. He painted a masterful, tragic picture. He described my parents as loving, devoted caregivers who had supported their academically gifted but socially isolated daughter her entire life. He spoke of their heartbreak and concern after the death of my aunt, and my subsequent alarming withdrawal from reality. "Your Honor," he said, his voice resonating with false sincerity, "the Vances are not here to take their daughter's money. They are here to protect it. They are here to protect her. This is a young woman who, by her own family's admission, has never held a steady job. She lives in their basement. She has no discernible income or financial skills. To entrust a $5 million estate to someone in her fragile state would not be a kindness. It would be an act of cruelty." He then called his first witness, my father. Richard Vance walked to the stand, the very picture of a concerned patriarch. Henderson led him through a series of questions designed to establish my incompetence. "Mr. Vance, can you describe your daughter's employment situation?" "Well," my father said with a heavy sigh, she's a freelancer. She works on her computer in the basement. We've always encouraged her to find a more stable career path, but she's very focused on her projects." "And does she contribute financially to the household?" "No, Your Honor. We are happy to provide for her. We cover her food, her car, her health insurance. We just want her to be safe." "And what about her mental state since her aunt's passing?" "It's been difficult," he said, shaking his head sadly. "She's become more withdrawn, secretive. We're terribly worried she's being taken advantage of, or that she'll simply squander this inheritance on her online hobbies." It was a brilliant performance. He sounded so reasonable, so loving. But then, it was Jessica's turn to cross-examine. She approached the stand, her movements calm and deliberate. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice soft, "you stated that you've always provided for your daughter, is that correct?" "Yes, of course." "And you believe you are a responsible financial steward?" "I believe my record speaks for itself," he said proudly. Jessica paused, then held up a document. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence Exhibit A. This is a promissory note from 1,998 for $100,000, signed by Richard Vance, payable to his sister-in-law, Clara Vance. A loan, it appears, to cover losses from a failed real estate venture." My father's face went pale. Henderson shot to his feet. "Objection! Relevance?" "Your Honor," Jessica said smoothly, "Mr. Henderson has opened the door to my client's family's financial acumen. This document speaks directly to the petitioner's own history of financial management." "Objection overruled," the judge said, her eyes now fixed on my father. "Continue, Miss Morales." Jessica continued, producing another document. "And Exhibit B, canceled checks from Clara Vance to Margaret Vance, totaling over $40,000, paid to a certain casino in Atlantic City between 2008 and 2009. My mother let out a small gasp from her seat. My father looked like he was going to be sick. The narrative of the responsible parents was beginning to crumble. Jessica's final witness for our side was Dr. Ramirez, the Yale psychiatrist. She presented her findings clearly and concisely, concluding that I was an exceptionally high-functioning individual with no psychiatric impediments whatsoever. Then came the moment. Jessica turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the petitioners have based their entire case on the false premise that my client, Eleanor Vance, is jobless, has no income, and is financially illiterate. We are now prepared to definitively refute these claims." She turned and gave me a slight nod. I stood up and walked to the witness stand. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, but the only ones I saw were my family's. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and annoyance. They thought this was my final, desperate act. Jessica approached me. "Miss Vance, could you please state your occupation for the court?" I took a deep breath. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Ethelgard Technologies." A confused murmur went through the courtroom. Henderson scoffed audibly. "Your Honor, is this a joke? What is Ethelgard Technologies?" "Perhaps I can clarify," Jessica said, turning to him with that sharp smile. She walked to the clerk, handing over a thick binder. "We would like to enter into evidence Exhibit D, the complete corporate and financial portfolio of Ethelgard Technologies," she began, her voice ringing through the silent room. Ethelgard Technologies is a privately held cybersecurity firm founded by Miss Vance 6 years ago. It currently employs 42 people across 6 countries. She held up the first document for the judge and the petitioner's table to see. These are the Articles of Incorporation, listing Eleanor Vance as the sole founder. My parents and Daniel leaned forward, squinting at the paper, their faces frozen in disbelief. "Ethelgard specializes in encrypted data solutions for the financial and defense industries," Jessica continued, her voice gaining power. "This is a list of their current clients, which includes 3 of the 5 largest investment banks in North America." She held up another document. "This is the company's most recent independent valuation, conducted last month for a new round of investment, placing the company's current worth at $52 million. The gasp in the courtroom was audible this time. My mother put a hand to her mouth. Daniel looked like he had been punched in the stomach. My father just stared, his jaw hanging open. Jessica wasn't done. She saved the best for last. "And finally, Your Honor, the petitioners claim my client has no income. This is a certified copy of Miss Vance's personal tax return for the last fiscal year, showing a reported income of $2,470,000. She dropped the binder onto the petitioner's table with a loud thud that echoed through the room. "The defense rests, Your Honor." The silence was absolute. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. Judge Miller looked down from her bench, staring at the documents, then at my parents, then at me. A slow, incredulous smile touched her lips. She looked at Mr. Henderson. "Counselor," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "Do you have any response to this?" Henderson, for the first time, was speechless. He stammered, opened his mouth, and then closed it. He looked at my father, who was ashen-faced and shaking his head in stunned silence. The judge's gaze fell on my parents. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You have brought a frivolous, malicious, and frankly fraudulent petition before this court. You have wasted the court's time and attempted to perpetrate a grave injustice against your own daughter, not to mention slandering the memory of the deceased. This petition is dismissed with extreme prejudice." She slammed her gavel down, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "And I would strongly advise you, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, to consider the potential legal ramifications of perjury and filing a fraudulent court document. This hearing is adjourned." As the judge swept out of the room, my family remained frozen in their seats, their world completely shattered. I stood up, smoothed down my dress, and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. I had won. But the war wasn't over. Now I had to go back to the house one last time and claim my freedom. Walking out of that courthouse felt like stepping into a different atmosphere. The air seemed lighter, the colors brighter. The weight of a lifetime of being underestimated had been lifted in a single cataclysmic moment. I didn't wait for Jessica. I didn't need to. I got into my old, reliable car, the one my father had so condescendingly reminded me he paid the insurance on, and drove back to the house. The house that had been my home, my office, and my prison. When I walked in, silence greeted me. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with the ghosts of what had just happened. I went straight down to the basement. I didn't look at my old desk, my multiple monitors, the whiteboard covered in algorithms. I looked at the boxes I had packed the week before, filled with my clothes, my books, and the few personal items that mattered. I had known, one way or another, that I would not be sleeping there again. I started carrying the boxes up the stairs and placing them by the front door. I was on my third trip when I heard them come in, my parents and Daniel. They moved like zombies, their faces pale and slack with shock. They saw the boxes piled in the foyer and stopped. "What? What are you doing?" my mother whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm moving out," I said simply, turning to go back down for another load. "Eleanor, wait," my father said, his voice a fraction of its usual booming confidence. He sounded broken. "We need to talk about this. There's been a misunderstanding." I stopped and turned to face him. "A misunderstanding?" I asked, a genuine, incredulous laugh escaping my lips. "You tried to have me declared mentally incompetent and steal my inheritance. You told a judge I was jobless and paranoid. What part of that was a misunderstanding?" "We didn't know," Daniel mumbled, finally finding his voice. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring at the floor, his usual arrogance replaced by a sort of pathetic shame. "You never told us." "Told you?" I repeated, my voice rising for the first time. "Why would I have told you? So you could dismiss it like my science fair project? So you could call it a little website like you always have, Daniel? So you could try to manage it for me, Dad? I didn't tell you because I knew you wouldn't believe me. And even if you did, you would have tried to take it from me, just like you tried to take Clara's gift." "We were just trying to protect you," my mother cried, the tears finally coming. But they weren't the manipulative tears of before. These were real tears of shock and loss. "No," I said, my voice softening slightly, but losing none of its firmness. "You were trying to protect yourselves. You couldn't stand the idea that the daughter you wrote off, the one who didn't fit into your perfect picture, was more successful than you could ever have imagined. It didn't compute. So you had to believe I was crazy. It was easier than admitting you were wrong. About everything." I picked up the last two boxes. "I'll send movers for the rest of my equipment tomorrow," I said, walking towards the door. "I'll also be sending you a bill for the $3,000 you stole from my savings account, plus interest. And a final bill for 10 years of IT services. I think $100,000 should cover it. Consider it a family discount." My father flinched as if I'd slapped him. I opened the front door. "Goodbye," I said, and I walked out. I loaded the last boxes into my car and drove away without looking back. I didn't see my mother crying on the porch, or my father standing rigid in the doorway. I was already looking forward. That night, I wasn't in a hotel. I was in my new home. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, I had purchased a penthouse apartment in the city, one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor that Clara had loved so much. I had paid for it in cash. My furniture, which I had ordered weeks ago, had been delivered that morning. The movers I'd hired had set up my new, state-of-the-art office in a spare bedroom. I stood by the window, looking out at the glittering lights, a glass of champagne in my hand. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ben, my CFO. "The internet is going crazy. Someone from the courthouse must have leaked the story. Number Jobless CEO is trending." I smiled. The silence was finally making a noise. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from my mother. "Please come home. We can fix this." I deleted it without replying. There was nothing left to fix. Something had broken, yes, but it was a cage. For the first time, I felt completely and utterly free. I wasn't Eleanor Vance, the disappointing daughter. I wasn't Evie, the anonymous founder. I was just Eleanor. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. The new dawn wasn't just coming. It was already here. I had my freedom and my fortune, but the story wasn't over. The aftershocks of that day in court would ripple through my family in ways I hadn't foreseen, and the question of what to do with the people who had tried to break me was a challenge I still had to face. 1 year. It's both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. 12 months after I walked out of that courtroom and my parents' house for the last time, my life was unrecognizable. Ethelgard Technologies was no longer a secret. The Jobless CEO story had gone viral, becoming a business press sensation. It was a double-edged sword. The publicity brought a flood of new clients and investment offers, but it also meant I could no longer hide. I had to step into the light and become the public face of my own company. It was terrifying at first, but Clara's words echoed in my mind. Build your own world in real life. So I did. I hired a PR team, did my first interviews, and even gave a TEDx talk about the power of being underestimated. Ethelgard moved from a network of remote servers into a sleek, modern headquarters in the heart of the city's tech hub. We were no longer a stealth startup, we were a major player, and I was at the helm. My new life was full and demanding, but it was mine. The penthouse overlooking the harbor was my sanctuary. I filled it with books, art, and the comfortable silence I had always craved. I also used my newfound resources to honor the person who made it all possible. I established the Clara Vance Scholarship for Women in Technology, a multi-million-dollar fund administered by my alma mater, MIT, designed to support brilliant young women who, like me, didn't fit the traditional mold. At the inaugural ceremony, watching the first 10 recipients accept their awards with tears of joy in their eyes, I felt Clara's presence more strongly than ever. Her legacy wasn't just in my bank account. It was in the futures she was now helping to build. And what of my family? The justice they faced wasn't delivered by a judge's gavel, but by the slow, inexorable grind of reality. The courtroom revelation had sent a shockwave through their social circle. The story, in all its humiliating detail, became the gossip of the country club, the talk of every dinner party. My father, a man who lived and died by his reputation, became a social pariah. His business partners grew wary. His friends distanced themselves. His carefully constructed world of prestige had been built on a lie, the lie of his own success and my failure. And when that lie was exposed, the entire structure collapsed. They were forced to sell the house, that monument to their vanity, and downsize to a small condo an hour away. Daniel was hit the hardest. Without the endless fountain of his parents' money and misplaced belief, his startup imploded within months. He had no real skills, no work ethic, and a vastly inflated sense of his own importance. He tried to leverage his connection to me, calling himself the brother of the jobless CEO in investor meetings. It backfired spectacularly. No one wanted to invest in the entitled brother of a self-made genius. The last I heard, he was working a low-level sales job, complaining bitterly that I had ruined his life by being successful. He still didn't get it. I hadn't ruined his life. I had simply stopped subsidizing his fantasy. My mother tried to reach out several times. She sent long, rambling emails filled with apologies, excuses, and pleas for reconciliation. She wrote about how lonely she was, how much she missed me, how she had only ever wanted what was best. I read them, and I felt a pang of sadness for the mother-daughter relationship we never had, but I didn't reply. Forgiveness was one thing, amnesia was another. Trust, once shattered so completely, cannot be glued back together with words alone. I did establish one new boundary, one final line of communication. Every month, I sent them a check. Not a large one, just enough to cover their basic living expenses. It wasn't an act of forgiveness or affection. It was an act of finality. It was my way of closing the ledger. They had claimed I was a financial burden, so I would become their reluctant, distant benefactor. They had tried to take everything from me, so I would give them just enough to ensure they could never again claim they were victims. They cashed every single check. The relationship was over. There were no more dramatic confrontations, no tearful reunions. There was only a quiet, sad distance. I learned that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for yourself is to love someone from afar without letting them back into your life to cause more harm. My family became a collection of names on a bank transfer, a chapter in my life that was well and truly closed. My new family was the one I had built. My brilliant team at Aethelgard, the scholars of Clara's foundation, the friends who had seen my worth long before it had a dollar value attached to it. It was a family forged not by blood, but by shared values of integrity, loyalty, and mutual respect. I had built a new life, established new boundaries, and found a measure of peace. But there was one final lesson I had to learn, a lesson that came not from my enemies, but from the legacy of the woman who had always been my greatest ally. One rainy afternoon last month, I was going through some of Clara's old boxes that had been in storage. Tucked away at the bottom of a chest filled with vintage computer manuals and engineering textbooks, I found a small, worn leather journal. It was her diary from the early days, when she was first starting out in Silicon Valley. I sat down and began to read. Page after page, she detailed the sexism, the dismissal, the constant struggle of being the only woman in a room full of arrogant men. She wrote about having her ideas stolen, being passed over for promotions, being told she was too aggressive or not a team player. She described the loneliness and the self-doubt, the nights she spent wondering if she should just give up and go home. But she never did. With every setback, every insult, she just worked harder, got smarter, and became more determined. She wrote about building her own team, finding other outsiders and rebels, and creating a space where talent was the only thing that mattered. She hadn't just built a company. She had built a fortress against the world's low expectations. Reading her words, I finally understood. My struggle wasn't just my own. It was hers, too. The battles she had fought decades ago were the same battles I had just won. The parents who dismissed me were just a stand-in for the bosses who dismissed her. My brother, who belittled my work, was the echo of the colleagues who stole her ideas. She hadn't just left me her money. She had left me her resilience. It was encoded in my DNA. The inheritance wasn't the $5 million. It was the strength to earn it myself 10 times over. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about the corrupting nature of greed or the pain of betrayal. It was about the quiet power of self-belief. For years, I had allowed my family's definition of me to become my reality. I was the quiet one, the jobless one, the one in the basement. I had accepted their narrative. Clara's final gift, the trial by fire they put me through, forced me to reject that narrative and write my own. It forced me to finally become the person she always saw when she looked at me. My worth was never determined by their validation. It was forged in the silence, in the late nights, in the lines of code that no one else understood. It was there all along. I just had to be pushed to claim it. My life now is rich, not because of the money, but because it is authentic. It is a life built on my own terms, guided by my own values. The silence of the basement has been replaced by the collaborative buzz of my office. The casual cruelty of my family replaced by the genuine respect of my team. I found that true family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. It's the people who see your light, even when you're hiding it in the dark, and who aren't afraid when you finally let it shine. Have you ever had to fight to be seen for who you truly are, especially by your own family? What did that journey teach you about your own strength? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next story of overcoming the odds. And remember, never let anyone else write your story for you. The most powerful weapon you will ever have is the unwavering belief in your own value, even if you're the only one who can see it. Thank you for listening.